Have you ever wondered why a really strong cup of coffee makes some people literally bounce off the walls? But
But it makes others want to take a nap.
yeah, exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking through this massive stack of medical journals, psychological reviews, and recent meta-analyses to explore the neurobiology of ADHD and caffeine.
Right, the classic stimulant paradox. Our mission today is to figure out exactly why the ADHD brain reacts so differently to the world's most popular psychoactive drug.
I mean, we already know ADHD is fundamentally a state of chronic underarousal, but looking at the data in these journals on dopamine transporter density, it really puts that into perspective.
It does. Some of these brains show up to a 70% increase in dopamine transporters.
70%. How does that surplus actually create that baseline under-aroused state?
Well, think of those transporters as highly aggressive vacuums. They sweep up dopamine before it even has a chance to properly stimulate the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, wow.
Because of that rapid clearing process, the brain struggles to reach what researchers call the Goldilocks zone of optimal arousal.
So if a neurotypical brain is already sitting near that perfect baseline, adding a stimulant like caffeine just pushes them right over the edge.
Into anxiety and jitters, yeah.
Mm.
But for an ADHD brain starting far below that baseline, caffeine is simply bridging the gap to normal.
Which perfectly explains what the psych reviews call the quiet brain phenomenon. I always found it fascinating that hitting that baseline doesn't just make you focused, can actually make you sleepy.
The contrast is completely jarring for the nervous system. You have to remember, many people with ADHD live with constant, chaotic mental noise.
Right. So when caffeine bridges that dopamine gap and suddenly quiets the internal chaos.
The onset of mental clarity feels overwhelmingly relaxing. That sudden relief from chronic mental overstimulation is what causes that intense paradoxical sleepiness.
It makes perfect sense why an afternoon espresso might accidentally be a heavy sleep aid for someone.
That's-
But looking at how caffeine actually achieves this, author David DeSalvo has this brilliant bouncer analogy in the sources. Reading through it, I had this moment of realization where I thought, wait, caffeine isn't actually stepping on the gas pedal at all, is it?
No, it's just cutting the brake lines.
That is
It's
wild.
a highly accurate way to look at it. Caffeine is basically running interference.
Hmm.
Throughout the day, adenosine builds up in your brain, acting like a bouncer, telling your body it's time to wind down and sleep.
And caffeine just blocks those adenosine receptors.
Right. It distracts the bouncer, leaving your primary neurotransmitters, dopamine and glutamate, free to fire, unchecked.
But if dopamine is just firing unchecked because the fatigue barrier is gone, how does that compare to actual prescription ADHD medications?
This is where the neurological mechanics really matter. The research makes a stark distinction here between divergent and convergent attention.
Because caffeine just lets your brain run loose.
Yes, which makes it fantastic for divergent attention, bouncing between ideas, brainstorming, and getting the initial motivation to start a task.
But it completely falls apart when you need convergent attention. You know, deep, sustained focus on a single complex task.
Because it lacks the targeted mechanism of prescription stimulants. Medications are designed to actively increase and sustain dopamine levels in very specific neural pathways to hold focus.
While caffeine is more of a scattershot approach.
Exactly. You might have the energy to start, but you don't have the directed neurochemical support to sustain a singular line of thought without getting distracted.
That distinction really frames the warnings we saw in the recent meta-analyses. Caffeine might be a widely available tool, but the data shows it's highly unpredictable.
Highly unpredictable, and your brain builds a rapid tolerance to it. Furthermore, because it travels systemically throughout the whole body, it impacts things like your blood pressure and digestion.
Right, which is why medical experts universally agree that caffeine should not be recommended as a substitute for targeted prescription stimulants.
They are very clear on that.
So whether you have ADHD or not, understanding how your unique brain metabolizes these neurotransmitters reveals that your morning coffee isn't just energy in a mug. It is a complex neurochemical balancing act.
It really is. And if a simple, everyday cup of coffee has the power to completely alter the volume and chaos of your internal thoughts, it leaves you wondering,
Wondering,
what other mundane dietary habits are secretly rewiring your brain's baseline reality without you even noticing?